Imagine this. You're working a quiet night shift, all alone in a dimly lit motel. The kind of place that's passed through countless hands, where the sound of a door closing is often the only thing that breaks the silence. A small town, off the beaten path motel, far from the glitz of city lights. You're a motel maid, doing your usual rounds, cleaning rooms, resetting the space, and folding towels. You've seen your fair share of strange guests, but nothing like this. For days, you've been watching the same little girl come and go with a man she calls her new dad. It seems innocent at first, just another father-daughter duo, maybe a remarried couple, or someone trying to make a new start. But there's something about their behavior that catches your attention, and soon enough, it becomes something you can't ignore. Each night, the girl and her new dad return to the same room, but their interactions start to feel off. The details don't add up. The small, unsettling things, like how the man seems overly protective of her, or how they disappear into the room without a trace, only to emerge again hours later, are impossible to shake. But here's the kicker. Every time they walk into the room, something strange happens right before they enter. The motel maid watches them through a window, and each time, the girl looks at her as if she knows something she shouldn't, like she's hiding something behind those innocent eyes. What's going on in that room? Why does the maid feel like something terrible is about to unfold? Why does she get the eerie feeling that she's witnessing a moment that's far bigger than her, and one that could change everything? The maid's curiosity grows. She watches night after night, wondering if she's overthinking it, but the truth begins to unravel in a way that will make your skin crawl. Something isn't right, and the more the maid watches, the more she uncovers. As the pieces come together, a chilling picture emerges. It's one thing to wonder if she's just seeing things, but what she finally witnesses through that window will stun her. Now, I know what you're thinking. What could possibly be so shocking that it stops the maid dead in her tracks? What did she see that she couldn't just forget? It's a mystery, and you're about to find out exactly what happens next. But here's the thing. You can't look away. There's a reason you clicked on this video. There's a reason you're here right now, and by the end of this story, you'll be hooked, wondering what happens after that final twist. This is a tale of mystery, suspense, and a chilling revelation that no one could have predicted. But before we dive deeper into the truth of what the maid uncovered, let me ask you, have you ever felt like something was off? Have you ever been in a situation where the tiniest detail didn't sit right, and you couldn't put your finger on why? That's the feeling this maid is battling every night as she observes this father-daughter duo, and trust me, she's about to discover something that will make her question everything she thought she knew about the world around her. And if you think you know where this is going, trust me, you don't. What you think is happening is only the beginning. So, sit back, keep watching, and let's unravel this strange story together. Because by the time you reach the end of this video, you'll be as shocked as the maid was when she finally saw what she saw through that motel window. Stay tuned, because this mystery isn't just about the girl and her new dad. It's about a story that will haunt you long after you hear the truth. For the motel maid, whose name we'll keep to ourselves for now, life had always been about routine. Every day she woke up early to clean, to scrub, to reset the rooms for the next guest. It wasn't glamorous work, but it paid the bills. She'd been working at this same small, off-the-highway motel for almost 2 years now, long enough to become familiar with the regulars, the short-term stays, and the transient faces that passed through. Nothing ever really stood out until they arrived. This father-daughter duo, the man with the rough features and the little girl who always clung to him, always seemed like they had just come from somewhere else, somewhere she couldn't place. Their arrival had been strange from the start. It wasn't just the fact that the girl seemed younger than she should have been for a child of her age. It was how the man acted. There was something about the way he looked at the girl. Something that didn't sit right. He was too cautious, too protective in a way that went beyond normal parental instincts. When she'd seen them for the first time, they'd checked in late, around 9 p.m. The man had looked over his shoulder several times before entering the office, as if worried someone might see them. At first, the maid brushed it off, assuming it was nothing, but as days passed, she began to notice more and more oddities. Every night, without fail, The man and the girl returned to the same room, a room that, by all accounts, shouldn't have been anything special. Yet there was something about that room. The maid could never quite shake the sense that there was more to the story. Maybe it was the way the curtains in the window were always drawn so tightly, never allowing a glimpse of what was happening inside. Or maybe it was the fact that every time they left, the girl would look back at the window with such a knowing gaze, like she was aware she was being watched, and yet she didn't seem scared. The girl never said anything out of the ordinary, and the man always gave the maid a courteous nod when passing her in the halls, but there was an unnerving distance between them, a kind of coldness in the air whenever they were near. What made it even stranger was that no one else seemed to notice. The other guests, the occasional trucker or passing traveler, didn't pay the pair much attention. They checked in, stayed for a night or two, and left without anyone batting an eye. But for the maid, the repetition of the father and daughter's routine was like a ticking clock. She couldn't help but watch, wondering if she was simply overreacting, letting her imagination get the best of her. But when something started to feel off about their arrival and departure times, she couldn't ignore it anymore. The first time the girl entered the room without the man, it stopped her dead in her tracks. It wasn't so much the act itself, but the suddenness of it. The little girl, always so close to her new dad, had walked alone toward the room, her eyes wide with uncertainty, as though she was waiting for something to happen. The maid had seen this girl, day after day, and yet this time was different. The girl had stood in front of the door for a moment, almost as if deciding whether or not to enter, then quickly turned the knob and disappeared inside. The maid couldn't help but wonder. Where was the man? Why had he let the girl go inside by herself, after everything that had happened in the previous days? And why didn't anyone else seem to think anything of it? Days later, the maid would find herself staring through that same window again, watching as the man returned alone. He looked tired, his face drawn and pale, like he hadn't slept in days. Something was wrong, she could feel it. But when the girl didn't return with him, when the motel went quiet for several hours, a new question arose in her mind. Where was the girl? Was the man hiding something? Or worse, was she in danger? The maid couldn't shake the feeling that there was a connection between the strange patterns she'd been witnessing and the rumors she'd heard from other guests in passing. One trucker had mentioned a story about a child going missing in a nearby town a few weeks prior, though no one knew the details. Another guest had whispered something about a strange couple, always in a hurry, always making sure they were never seen together in public. The pieces of this puzzle were starting to fall into place, but none of them made sense. The following night, things took an even stranger turn. The maid, standing in the hallway as she cleaned another room, saw the girl and the man together again. But this time the girl was carrying something. It looked like a stuffed animal, an old bear with a faded ribbon tied around its neck. She clutched it to her chest, holding it as if it were a lifeline, a last thread of security. The maid's heart skipped a beat. She hadn't seen that bear before. It seemed out of place, like it didn't belong with them. She was about to step forward and ask if everything was okay, but the man's cold gaze stopped her in her tracks. He didn't speak, didn't offer a smile like he usually did, just stared at her, his eyes dark and unreadable. In that moment, everything changed. The maid knew something was wrong, but she couldn't explain why. And she certainly didn't know how to fix it. So, she did what anyone in her position would do. She watched. She waited, trying to make sense of the growing sense of dread in her chest. What had she seen? Was she just imagining things? Or had she stumbled onto something far more sinister than she could have ever predicted? And here's where things take a turn you won't expect. The night after the man left, the girl didn't come back. The maid, consumed by worry, did something she'd never done before. She walked to the room. The same room where the pair had stayed for so many nights. The same room that had now become a symbol of everything she couldn't understand. What she found there, well, that's a story you won't believe. But let me tell you this, by the time the maid stepped away from that door, everything would change. And so, now the question remains, what happened behind that door? What did the maid discover that night that left her questioning everything? The truth is closer than you think, But will you be ready for what's about to unfold? Keep watching, because you won't want to miss what comes next. The morning after that strange, silent night, something didn't sit right with the motel maid. She'd barely slept, replaying the image of that little girl clutching the worn-out stuffed bear over and over in her mind. There was something unsettling about it, about the way the bear didn't seem to belong, or how the man's expression had shifted from polite caution to something darker, almost threatening. She couldn't explain it, but her gut told her something terrible was hiding behind that room's closed door. And when she returned the next day, ready to clean the room as she had done dozens of times before, she noticed something that immediately made her stomach drop. The door was ajar. That room was never left open. Not once in the months they'd been staying there. She hesitated, heart racing, before slowly pushing the door all the way open. But when she stepped inside, expecting to find answers, anything that could explain what she'd seen, she found nothing. The room was completely empty. No bags, no clothes, no signs of the man or the girl. It was as if they had never been there at all. Even the stuffed bear was gone. The bed was made. The towels were folded. No checkout record. No charges on the logbook. Not even a name. She blinked hard, trying to make sense of it. But the more she searched for a trace, the more she realized that the room had been wiped clean. Sterile. Intentional. Like someone had come in and erased everything. That's when it hit her. Someone didn't want this room, or whatever had happened in it, to leave behind a trace. Just as the sense of confusion threatened to overwhelm her, she turned to the front desk clerk, an older man named Roy who had worked there longer than anyone else. He'd always been quiet, kept to himself, but dependable in the way that small-town folks tend to be. When she asked him about the guests, the man and the little girl, his expression changed in an instant. His usual calm demeanor was replaced by something unreadable, almost guarded. "I don't know who you're talking about," he said without making eye contact. "No one like that checked in here." She stared at him, waiting for him to crack, to say he was joking, but he didn't. Instead, he turned and walked away, leaving her standing there with more questions than answers. That was when she realized she might be the only one who saw them, or at least the only one willing to admit it. The weight of isolation set in fast. She tried to pull security footage from the office, hoping to spot even a glimpse of them walking in or out. But when she asked about the recordings, Roy claimed the cameras hadn't been working for weeks. "Budget cuts," he muttered, brushing her off. But that wasn't true. She'd seen the little red lights on the cameras blinking just the day before. Something was wrong, and the deeper she dug, the more resistance she met. It was like trying to chase shadows in a fog. Nothing held still long enough to make sense of. That night, just when she thought she might finally let it go, she found a note slipped under her apartment door. No name. No return address. Just 3 words scrawled in black ink across the page. "Stop watching her." She stood frozen, staring at the paper, the hairs on the back of her neck standing straight up. Her apartment wasn't connected to the motel. No one should have been able to get in without being noticed. But someone had. Someone who knew she was watching. Someone who didn't want her asking questions. Her first instinct was to go to the police, but she hesitated. What was she going to say? That she was suspicious of a guest no one else remembered, staying in a room that left no evidence, carrying a bear that vanished as quickly as it appeared? She didn't even know the man's name. And worst of all, there was no proof, not anymore. The next day brought an even bigger twist. While flipping through a small pile of forgotten items left behind by past guests, she found a photograph tucked inside a book someone had left behind weeks ago. It was creased and faded, like it had been kept hidden for a long time. The image showed 2 adults and a child standing in front of a car. Something about the car looked familiar. She looked closer and nearly dropped the photo. It was her motel. The lot was visible in the background. And the child in the picture? It was the same little girl, only younger. And standing beside her was not the man she knew as the new dad. It was someone else entirely. Someone she recognized. Her hands trembled as she flipped the photo over. In small writing it read, "Summer 2016, Room 9. But Room 9 had been sealed off for years. A pipe had burst during a bad winter storm, and the management never got around to repairing it. It was used for storage now, filled with broken furniture and extra mattresses. So, how could that girl have been staying there recently? And why did no one else seem to remember her ever being at the motel in the first place? The more she thought about it, the more things stopped making sense. And then she remembered something she had buried deep. Years ago, before she worked there had been a story about a child who disappeared from a nearby town. A strange man was spotted with her. The case had gone cold. But now she was starting to believe she had seen that child again. Alive. And here's where things truly spiral. That night, unable to sleep, she returned to room 9 just to satisfy the burning curiosity that was eating her alive. The door was supposed to be locked, but when she touched the knob, it creaked open. Slowly. Without a key. Without a sound. What she found inside was something she could have never prepared for, an object sitting in the middle of the floor that did not belong there. Something that connected every piece of the puzzle together, and something that absolutely should not have been there. But just as she stepped inside to take a closer look, she heard a noise behind her, the unmistakable sound of footsteps, and the door slowly closing. As the door behind her clicked shut, a slow chill crept up the back of her neck like ice water slipping beneath her skin. The room was pitch black, save for a sliver of moonlight filtering through a crack in the boarded-up window, casting long, jagged shadows across the floor. She turned quickly, half expecting someone to be standing there, someone who had followed her in. But the hallway was empty. No sound. No voice. Just the heavy stillness of a place long abandoned. She took a cautious step forward, her eyes settling back on the object that had drawn her inside. It was the same stuffed bear, the one she'd seen clutched by the little girl just nights before. Its fabric was dirtier now, the ribbon around its neck frayed and discolored, as if it had been buried for years. She knelt down, slowly reaching for it, but just as her fingers grazed the fur, she noticed something else, a scrap of paper, barely tucked beneath the toy's arm, its edge stained with what looked like dried mud or something darker. She pulled it out, unfolding it with shaking hands. The handwriting was different this time, rushed and panicked, almost illegible in places. But one sentence burned into her brain the moment her eyes landed on it. "She's not the only one. You were supposed to forget." The words hit her like a slap. They weren't just a warning. They were a message directed straight at her. Whoever had written this didn't just know about the girl. They knew about her. About something she had forgotten, or forced herself to forget. But before she could even begin to make sense of what that meant, her phone buzzed in her pocket. It was a message from an old friend she hadn't spoken to in nearly 4 years. Lena, a former coworker who had left the motel job suddenly after a breakdown no one ever fully explained. They'd lost touch completely, and the maid assumed Lena had moved on, found peace somewhere far away. But the message was anything but peaceful. It read, "Have they found you yet? Don't open the door if they do. Don't trust anyone." Her heart pounded, her grip tightening around the phone. This wasn't random. Lena somehow knew something. Maybe she had been through the same thing. Maybe the girl, or someone like her, had crossed paths with Lena, too. She tried calling Lena, desperate to hear her voice, but the call didn't go through. Disconnected. Not even a ring. It was as if Lena didn't exist anymore. With the weight of that message still pressing down on her, she left room 9, locking the door behind her, unsure whether she was trying to keep someone out or something in. The next morning, she arrived early at the motel, determined to look through old records, anything that could connect the girl's presence to past guests. But when she unlocked the file cabinet, she found it empty. Every guest log, every registration card, every detail from the last 6 months gone. Cleaned out. Sanitized. As if someone had known exactly what she was going to look for and got there first. And that's when she noticed it. Her own employee file was missing too. Her panic swelled, but she didn't have time to process it because Roy, the same front desk clerk who had pretended not to remember the man and girl, was suddenly hovering near the hallway, watching her with eyes that now looked nothing like the ones she had trusted. He smiled. Not warmly. Not like a friend. but with a strange calmness that felt entirely too knowing. "Looking for something?" he asked. The words were casual, but his tone was far too deliberate, too smooth, as if he knew exactly what she had discovered, and exactly how much further she was willing to go. She felt a chill again, deeper this time. Roy had never once mentioned Lena, never acknowledged that she even worked there. And when she asked him about her directly, his response was quick, rehearsed. "No one by that name ever worked here. You must be confused." That was the moment it all shifted. The motel wasn't just hiding something, it was built on something. She remembered now, faint images and feelings breaking through the haze like a dam cracking under pressure. A girl crying in the night. A door slammed shut. A voice telling her to stay quiet. The memories weren't clear, but they were real. And suddenly, everything she thought she knew about her job, the motel, even her own past began to unravel. Then came the final blow. Later that night, while flipping through an old newspaper archive online, she stumbled across a headline from 7 years ago. "Local teen found after escaping man who posed as her father." The picture with the article showed a girl, slightly older than the one she'd seen, but unmistakably the same. Same wide eyes. Same delicate frame. The story said the girl had been rescued from a backwoods property not far from the motel. Her captor had evaded arrest. No one knew where he went. The girl's identity had been sealed to protect her. But the last line of the article stopped her cold. The victim was found holding a bear with a red ribbon, one she claimed reminded her of her real home. And then it hit her. The bear wasn't just a toy. It was a trigger, a tether to the girl's trauma, and maybe hers, too. The timelines didn't match up. Or maybe they did, if someone had manipulated them. If someone had made sure people forgot. And what if Lena hadn't disappeared because she broke down, but because she remembered too much? And now she was next. But before she could even begin to wrap her mind around the implications, she heard it again. Footsteps outside her apartment door. This time slower, heavier, not in a rush to hide. She grabbed her phone, heart in her throat, and rushed to the peephole. No one was there, just silence. But when she opened the door, another note had been left. No envelope, just a sentence scribbled on the back of one of the motel's old receipts. Check the photo again. She's not alone in it. And when she did, what she saw changed everything. Her hands trembled as she held the photograph under the harsh kitchen light, the shadows dancing off its worn edges. She had stared at that picture before, multiple times, convinced it only showed the girl, the man, and the car. But now, as her eyes scanned every inch with renewed urgency, she saw something she hadn't noticed before. In the background, reflected faintly in the car's glossy window, was the outline of another figure. It wasn't clear, more of a silhouette than a person, but unmistakably there. Someone watching from the distance, standing motionless at the edge of the frame. The reflection sent an icy pulse through her chest. Whoever had taken the photo wasn't alone. Someone else had been there the entire time, and they had gone unnoticed until now. That single realization shattered what little piece she clung to. Her pulse quickened. Her skin prickled. The room suddenly felt too small, too quiet, like the air had been sucked out and replaced with dread. She didn't sleep that night. She tried, she really did, but every creak of the floorboards, every passing car, every faint rustle of wind felt like an omen. Her phone buzzed once just past 3 a.m. She grabbed it immediately, only to find a single photo sent from an unknown number. No text. No explanation. The image was dark, grainy, probably taken from a distance. But there was no mistaking it. It was her, standing in front of room 9, captured from the shadows. The timestamp was from 2 nights ago. She hadn't seen anyone. No one had been there. Or at least no one she saw. Her breath caught. Whoever sent the picture had been following her for days, maybe longer. Watching her, waiting for something. And now they wanted her to know. She left the motel early the next morning under the guise of a family emergency, unable to take another step inside that building. But even as she drove away, heart pounding with every mile she put between herself and that place, She couldn't shake the feeling that something had followed her. Cars seemed to linger longer in her rear-view mirror. People on the sidewalk turned their heads just a fraction too late, as if they'd been watching until she noticed. She changed her route home twice, ducked into a grocery store she didn't need to visit, and parked behind a delivery truck just to see who else might turn onto her street. Every decision became a calculated risk. Every face a potential threat. By the time she arrived home, her nerves were shot. She barely had time to close the door before her phone lit up again, this time with a voicemail from Lena. It was the first real contact she'd gotten from her since the message days earlier. The voice was breathless, panicked, broken up by static and muffled background noise that sounded like wind and maybe distant traffic. "They know you're digging. You shouldn't have gone back to room 9. It's not just her. They do this over and over. They erase people. They erase everything." And then there was silence, followed by a single, barely audible whisper. "Don't trust the file. They're watching that too." The message ended abruptly. No callback number. No trace. She replayed it a dozen times, each listen carving deeper into her panic. If Lena had been silenced once, maybe this was her last warning. In desperation, she turned to the only other person she thought she could trust, her younger brother, Jamie. He had never worked at the motel, but he remembered Lena had met her once during a 4th of July cookout years ago. She explained everything, half hysterical, showing him the picture, the texts, even the voicemail. He didn't roll his eyes. He didn't laugh. He just nodded slowly, taking it all in. "You need to leave," he said quietly. "Now. Pack a bag. Don't tell anyone where you're going. And don't use your phone. I'll handle this." She begged him not to do anything reckless, but Jamie had always been stubborn, and even though she wanted to believe he was overreacting, a part of her hoped he could somehow help solve the mystery. But the next morning, Jamie was gone. Vanished. His phone went straight to voicemail. His apartment was locked from the inside, nothing out of place except for one thing. The photograph she had given him, sitting on the kitchen counter, burned around the edges, like someone had tried to destroy it but stopped midway. It was then she noticed what had changed. The figure in the car window's reflection was no longer just a blur. Somehow, impossibly, it had grown clearer. And now it looked like her. A younger version of herself, maybe a decade ago, standing exactly where the stranger had been. She felt a scream claw at her throat. This wasn't just about the girl. It wasn't just about the motel. The timelines weren't broken. They had been rewritten. She was a part of this, somehow, maybe from the beginning. And someone out there wanted to make sure she never remembered the truth. She stood frozen in the middle of Jamie's apartment, the burned photograph shaking in her hand like it had a pulse of its own. Her thoughts were a tangled mess of fear, confusion, and something far worse, recognition. That reflection, the younger version of herself in the car's window, wasn't just a trick of the light. It was her. No doubt about it. But she had no memory of being anywhere near that place at that age, no memory of that car, that motel, or that little girl. And yet there she was, staring back from a moment supposedly captured years ago. It didn't make sense. None of it did. Unless she hadn't forgotten. She had been made to forget. She grabbed her phone, her fingers fumbling as she searched for a local memory retrieval clinic she'd read about months ago in an article about trauma therapy. Hypnotherapy. Regression. Techniques used to uncover repressed memories. She had laughed it off back then. Now it felt like the only thread left to pull. She booked a session under a fake name and paid in cash, the kind of move that felt paranoid just days ago but now seemed like basic survival. The therapist was soft-spoken, cautious, and clearly skeptical. "You want to access memories that you believe were deliberately erased?" he repeated, arching an eyebrow. "This isn't a movie. It doesn't work like that." But something in her eyes must have convinced him. Pity, maybe, or fear. She didn't care. All she knew was that if she didn't uncover whatever truth was buried inside her, someone else was going to bury her too. The session was rough, visceral. Flashes of color and sound, disconnected fragments of places she couldn't place, and faces she couldn't name. Until suddenly she saw it. A house deep in the woods. Not a motel. A house. The wallpaper was peeling, the furniture covered in dust, but it was familiar in a way that made her stomach twist. She was there. Maybe 10, maybe 12. Someone was speaking softly in the other room. A man's voice. Not her father's. A voice she remembered only as a feeling. Cold, smooth, patient. Like someone pretending to be kind. She walked into the room, barefoot, heart pounding. And that's when the twist hit her like a freight train. The little girl wasn't someone else. She was the girl. The one she had watched night after night through the motel window. The one she thought needed saving. The one she had become obsessed with. There was no mystery girl. There was no new dad. There was only a distorted memory of herself, projected outward because her mind couldn't cope with what had really happened. She bolted upright from the session, gasping for air, her hands gripping the sides of a chair like she was about to fall off the edge of the earth. The therapist looked shaken too, not by what she said, she hadn't said much, but by the look in her eyes when she came out of it. "You need to be careful," he said quietly. "This isn't just trauma. This is structured. Programmed. Like someone intentionally built walls in your mind." And that's when the final twist began to unfold, not in the memory, but in real life. Because the moment she left the office, a woman was waiting for her in the hallway. Not someone she knew, but someone who clearly knew her. She was dressed in casual clothes, jeans, sneakers, a windbreaker, harmless on the surface. But her eyes were anything but calm, calculated, professional. "We need to talk," the woman said simply. "I'm from the program." Her voice was flat, emotionless, practiced. The main character felt her knees go weak. "What program?" she asked. "You already know," the woman replied. "You've just started remembering. That's going to be a problem for all of us." And before she could ask another question, the woman slipped a card into her pocket and walked away, disappearing into the crowd outside the clinic like she had never been there at all. She looked at the card. No name, no address, just a single symbol she didn't recognize and a phone number with no area code. Her fingers curled around it, her mind spiraling with possibilities. It wasn't about a missing girl. It wasn't about a predator. It was about her past, her identity, and maybe even her own compliance. Because the more she remembered, the more she started to realize she hadn't just been a victim. At some point, in some way, she had helped them. The card burned in her pocket like it carried a live current. She didn't want to call the number. She didn't want to admit she was even considering it. But the way that woman had looked at her, that steady, practiced calm that came from years of rehearsing every move, told her this wasn't something that could be ignored or escaped. It was already happening. The only question was whether she was going to face it or keep running and let them finish what they started. She sat in her car for almost an hour outside the clinic, the engine off, the heat slowly bleeding out into the cold air. Finally, with hands that wouldn't stop shaking, she dialed the number. It didn't even ring. Just a soft click and a voice on the other end. Automated, lifeless, but somehow more terrifying because of its calm precision. "You are requesting reactivation. Confirm identity." She hung up instantly, heart slamming against her ribs. Reactivation? What did that even mean? She wasn't part of anything. She couldn't be. And yet, part of her already knew the truth. She had been involved. Not willingly, not consciously, but deeply enough that whoever they were still saw her as one of their own. That night, she confronted her mother. She hadn't seen her in weeks, and now, suddenly, every distant memory from her childhood had become suspect. The house. The strange, late-night visitors. The way her mother had always insisted on privacy, on silence, on never asking questions. Her mother didn't answer the door right away. When she finally did, her face was pale, her eyes red like she hadn't slept in days. The moment their eyes met, there was a flicker of something between them. Fear, maybe even guilt, and that was all the confirmation she needed. They sat in the kitchen in complete silence for several minutes before she finally asked, voice raw and trembling, "What did you let them do to me?" Her mother didn't deny it, didn't lie, just looked down at her coffee cup like it held a universe, too heavy to explain. "You were chosen," she whispered. "That's what they told us. Chosen for something important. They said it would protect you, that you'd never remember, never suffer. We thought it was better than the alternative." The words didn't make sense, not at first. But they peeled away something deep inside her, something that felt like betrayal wrapped in protection. Her mother had made a deal. Maybe with people she barely understood, maybe with full knowledge of what it cost. Either way, it had fractured everything. Then came the real blow. Her mother reached into a drawer and pulled out a thin file, yellowed paper, stamped with a faded insignia that looked vaguely governmental but wasn't anything recognizable. Inside were pages of notes, testing logs, diagrams. Her name was on the top. A file on her development, behavioral markers, memory suppression records, timelines. Even a photo of her, at 9 years old, standing next to that same car from the motel photo, except now there was no one else in the frame. Just her. Alone. "They brought you back when the first version failed," her mother said quietly. "You weren't supposed to remember. None of the others did." Her stomach dropped. Others. There had been others like her. Maybe more girls. Maybe boys. All part of something that was far bigger, far darker than anything she'd imagined. That was when the phone rang again. Her personal cell this time. Unknown number. But this time, a real voice.
A man. Calm.
Collected. Authoritative. "You've come too far," he said. "We'll give you one chance to walk away. Forget what you've learned. Leave the file. Leave the photo. Return to your life, and this ends here. Otherwise, everything you think you know, everyone you think you love, will be taken apart. Bit by bit." She hung up, but the weight of his words settled in her chest like concrete. They weren't bluffing. They never had been. And now she was being forced to make an impossible choice. Expose the truth and put everyone she loved at risk, or bury it all again, and live with the knowledge that she had once helped monsters and didn't even know it. The cost of truth had never felt so high. Her mind raced with questions that had no answers. Was Jamie still alive? Had they taken him because she refused to stop? Could she really trust anyone at this point? Not her mother, not the therapist, not even herself? In the middle of the night, unable to sleep, she stared at the file again, hoping to find something, anything, that could break the spiral. That's when she noticed it. A symbol, scribbled faintly in the corner of one of the pages. The same symbol that had been on the card. Except this time it was next to a name. A name she hadn't seen in years. A friend from school. Someone she had lost touch with after a sudden, unexplained transfer to a private facility out of state. Someone who had once told her, before they vanished, "Sometimes we're made to forget because the truth is worse than the lie." And just like that, the next layer of the mystery revealed itself. It wasn't just her. It never was. The symbol on the page wouldn't stop pulling at her thoughts, dragging her deeper into a web she didn't even realize she'd been trapped in for most of her life. The name beside it, Kelsey Thorne, brought a wave of memories flooding back, all of them jagged and fragmented, but undeniably real. Kelsey had been her best friend in middle school, the only one who knew how to decode her moods, who stayed over after her father vanished, who held her hand in the dark when the nightmares got too intense. But Kelsey disappeared without warning during their sophomore year, and no one, not even the teachers, could give a clear answer. They said her parents moved. Some said she got sick. Others said nothing at all. And just like that, Kelsey was erased from the yearbook, from school records, from every place she had ever existed. Until now. Fueled by desperation, she dug through old boxes in her mother's basement, searching for a photo, a note, anything she'd kept from those years. Tucked inside the spine of a dusty yearbook was a torn page folded in half. A handwritten message in the looping cursive she recognized instantly as Kelsey's. "If they come for you too, find me. I didn't forget." And below that, a string of numbers. Coordinates. She punched them into her phone and saw a location. Remote, wooded, deep in the Blue Ridge Mountains. It wasn't just a message. It was a trail Kelsey had left behind, maybe years ago, waiting for the day someone else would break through the mental fog. She packed a bag and left before dawn, not telling her mother where she was going, not leaving a note. She didn't need to. If she didn't return, her mother would know exactly what happened. The trip was long, the winding mountain roads barely navigable by dusk, but she finally reached the coordinates. It was an old ranger station, long since abandoned, the door half off its hinges and the window shattered. But inside, scrawled across one of the walls in black marker, was the same symbol again, this time surrounded by dozens of photos. Faces. All children. Some older, some younger, but all familiar in an eerie, disjointed way. At the center of the display, taped like an anchor holding the whole web together, was a recent photo of her. It was a surveillance shot, taken from a distance, but there was no mistaking it. This wasn't just a personal trauma. It was part of a system, a network, a long-term experiment, still active, still recruiting. As she stared at the wall, someone stepped into the doorway. She spun around, half ready to fight or run, but then froze. It was Kelsey. Older, thinner, but very much alive. Her face was gaunt, her hair shorter, her eyes sharp from years of watching her back. "I wasn't sure you'd come," she said, voice cracking beneath the strength it took to stay calm. "They let some of us go, but only the ones who passed." "Passed what?" She wanted to ask, but Kelsey was already pulling her deeper into the station, lighting a lantern to reveal a rusted safe built into the floor. Inside were stacks of files, labeled with cryptic codes and numbers, but what mattered were the photos, identities of others who had been taken, tested, erased. It spanned decades, generations. This wasn't a local experiment. It was national, institutional, funded, protected, covered up. That realization dropped like a thunderclap, but what hit even harder was what Kelsey said next. "Someone's feeding them everything you do. Every move you've made since you started digging, every place you've gone, every person you've contacted, has been reported." That's how they took Jamie. She didn't want to believe it, didn't want to accept that someone close had betrayed her. But the way Kelsey looked at her left no room for doubt. "Who?" she asked, voice hoarse, barely able to speak. Kelsey hesitated. "Roy," she finally said. "It's always been Roy." Her stomach turned violently. Roy, the front desk clerk who acted clueless, who pretended not to remember, who always showed up just a few minutes too late or too early, always with just enough information to sound innocent. He wasn't just involved. He was managing her, guiding her towards certain truths and away from others, containing her. She had trusted him, seen him as harmless, even protective at times, but he had been the eyes and ears all along. Her breathing became shallow. She felt like the walls were closing in. She had to go back. Not to confront him. He wouldn't crack, but to retrieve something he had, something she hadn't thought twice about. The motel guest book from 7 years ago, the one he claimed was missing.
She remembered now.
She had seen it on the back shelf before it disappeared. But before she could turn to leave, a low rumble echoed outside. Then headlights. Not one pair. 3. Black SUVs with tinted windows creeping up the dirt road, the kind used in movies and government raids. Kelsey grabbed her arm and pulled her toward the back exit. "We can't go out the front," she said. "They don't want to kill you yet, but they'll wipe you if they catch you. They've done it before." "What does that mean, wipe?" she asked, nearly stumbling down the steps. Kelsey didn't answer.
She didn't need to.
The files in the safe had already told her everything. Erased memories, reprogrammed behavior, constructed pasts, dozens of people living lives they didn't choose, remembering things that never happened, forgetting everything that did. She wasn't just fighting for her truth anymore. She was fighting for every name in that file. And now the countdown had started. Because the men outside weren't there to negotiate. They were there to end the story before it reached anyone. The basement of the motel was colder than she remembered, and the air hung thick with the scent of mold and rotting wood, like time itself had been trapped in the walls. The last time she was down here, she'd been a child, half asleep, scared, and dragged by hands she couldn't see. But this time, she walked in on her own. the flashlight trembling in her grip, not from fear but fury. She knew now that the truth had always been buried here, beneath layers of silence, between the cracks of every lie they fed her. The files she and Kelsey smuggled out had pointed to this place. The motel wasn't just a backdrop for whatever experiment had swallowed her childhood. It was the control room. The original site. The genesis. And if she was right, Roy would be waiting for her here, not just as a pawn, but as the architect behind it all. She stepped around the corner and froze. There he was, leaning against a rusted boiler tank, as calm and detached as if they were about to discuss maintenance work. His uniform was unbuttoned, revealing a tattoo across his chest, a familiar symbol, the one she had seen in Kelsey's makeshift war room, etched on every file, every case. A mark of allegiance. She took a step forward, swallowing the burn in her throat. "You watched me for years," she said, her voice low. "You knew exactly what happened to me, and you smiled to my face every single day." Roy didn't deny it. He just sighed and looked at her like a tired parent looks at a child too young to understand how the world works. "I didn't watch you. I protected you," he said, each word slow and deliberate. "You were supposed to be the control subject, the one who lived a normal life, so we could measure the baseline. But something broke in the programming. You remembered too much." His eyes flicked to the flashlight in her hand. "And now you've seen too much." She wanted to scream at him, to lunge and beat the truth out of him, but something deeper kept her still, the need to understand why. Why her? Why Kelsey? Why this motel? Roy noticed her hesitation and took advantage of it, stepping forward, suddenly looking more like a man confessing to save his soul than a villain unveiling his master plan. "You were born into it," he said, almost gently. "Your father volunteered. He signed you over. You think he disappeared, but we made him disappear. Because he broke protocol and tried to take you back." Her knees buckled slightly. "That's not true," she said, but her voice betrayed her. Deep down, she had always feared her father didn't leave. He was taken. "He fought harder than anyone," Roy continued. "He got close. Almost shut us down. But in the end, we made it look like a nervous breakdown. Weary wrote him. You probably passed him on the street and didn't even know." She couldn't breathe. The room spun around her, and for a moment, she was the little girl again, powerless, voiceless, trapped in a place where no one came to help.
But something inside her snapped.
Not fear. Resolve. She stepped forward and threw the file folder down at Roy's feet, photos scattering across the concrete floor.
"This ends now," she said.
"I uploaded everything. The files. The names. The recordings. It's all in the cloud. You can't erase it this time." Roy's jaw tightened. The calm disappeared. "You think they'll believe you? You think the government will admit this? No one will touch it. You're just another girl with a story and a camera. They'll call you unstable. Conspiracy theorist. You'll be discredited within a week."
She smiled.
Not because she felt confident, but because she finally understood the real weapon she had. "You don't get it," she whispered. "It's already viral." The trending tag was blowing up. #MissingFilesMotel, sparked by a single upload of one photo from the wall in the ranger station. People were sharing stories, recognizing faces. It wasn't just her anymore. It was everyone who had been silenced. Roy moved fast, too fast. He lunged toward her, and the flashlight clattered to the ground as they collided. They struggled, bodies crashing into rusted shelves and broken pipes, his hands tightening around her wrists as she fought to reach the flare gun tucked in her bag. She managed to twist, elbowing him hard in the ribs, and he fell back just enough. She grabbed the flare gun, pointed it straight at the fuse box behind him, and pulled the trigger. The explosion wasn't massive, but it was enough. Sparks erupted, smoke filled the room, and Roy stumbled backward into the shadows. She didn't wait to see if he'd follow. She ran, coughing, vision blurred, until she burst out into the night air where Kelsey was waiting with the van engine running. "Did you get it?" Kelsey asked, eyes wide. She nodded. "I got everything. And I think I found my father." But just as they sped down the dirt road, sirens blaring in the distance, headlights closing in behind them, her phone buzzed with a new notification. It was from an unknown number. A video file. She opened it, and her heart dropped. It was footage from the motel's front desk, dated just 3 days earlier. She watched as she entered the lobby, smiled at Roy, and handed him a key. Then, another version of her, wearing the same clothes, entered seconds later. 2 of her, standing in the same space, smiling the same smile. Her hands shook as the van raced toward the horizon. "Kelsey," she said, I think I was never the control subject." Kelsey didn't answer. She was staring straight ahead, knuckles white on the steering wheel. And in that moment, she knew the biggest twist of all wasn't what they did to her. It was what she might have done to others. They reached the old airstrip just before sunrise, the sky bruised with deep purples and faint streaks of amber, as if the earth itself was holding its breath. The van sputtered to a stop, and the silence that followed was deafening. Kelsey didn't say a word, her face still blank, but not from shock. This was something deeper, a kind of resignation that only comes from years of surviving in the cracks of a world no one believes exists. The main character stepped out slowly, her legs trembling. The video still burned into her memory. 2 of her. Same face. Same voice. Different eyes. And as much as she wanted to believe it was a trick, a glitch, some final mind game meant to throw her off, a part of her already knew the truth. She hadn't just been studied, she had been split. She found the answers in a forgotten hangar, buried in a rusted server that had somehow been missed during the purges. Video logs. Experiment notes. Files tagged with her name but cross-referenced with another, subject A17-3, a sleeper variant. The woman in the motel lobby wasn't an imposter. She was a version of her, born from the same trauma, programmed with different memories, activated under specific conditions. The project's goal had never been about control in the traditional sense. It was about replication, creating lives that could operate in parallel, without knowledge of each other. One to live in plain sight, the other in the shadows. Redundancy. Insurance. Total psychological compartmentalization. And she had finally merged those fractured pieces, though at an unfathomable cost. Kelsey stood behind her now, silent, watching as the final files downloaded onto the encrypted drive. "They'll never let this go," she said, voice quiet but steady. "They don't care about being caught, they care about being understood. And if this story gets out, the public won't know what to believe. That's what they're counting on." She was right. Even with proof, timestamps, DNA data, video evidence, most people would scroll past it, labeling it another deepfake conspiracy, just more internet noise. But some would stop. Some would look closer. Some would remember faces from old schools, faces that vanished without funerals, without explanations, just like Kelsey, just like so many others. And for those few, maybe that would be enough to start pulling the next thread. The final upload was complete. The drive would be mailed anonymously to journalists, whistleblower organizations, independent creators with the reach and courage to investigate what the mainstream would bury. She knew she wouldn't be able to stay connected to the world after this. The other version of herself was still out there, no doubt activated now, aware of her existence, with a purpose she couldn't predict. It was like looking into a mirror and realizing the reflection might blink when she didn't. That paranoia would never fully go away. But she also knew one thing with absolute clarity. She was no longer afraid of the truth. Kelsey handed her a burner phone, already programmed with a secure line and 2 contacts, one from the files labeled Parent X, possibly her father, and the other simply labeled Sparrow. A code name, maybe a deep source within the program, someone who had been feeding information to the girls all along. Whether they were friend or foe, she couldn't be sure. But the game had changed now. It wasn't just about exposing the project, it was about understanding what they had done to her, to all of them, and stopping it from happening again. They burned the server after that. Not out of fear of being tracked, it was already too late for that, but as a way of closing a chapter that had nearly cost them their sanity. The flames lit up the hangar with a sick orange glow, casting long shadows on the dirt airstrip, the same place where the project had likely begun. As they watched it burn, she thought about everyone who had been taken, altered, rewritten. She thought about her father, wherever he was. About Roy, whose fate was still uncertain. About the countless lives still living under false identities, never knowing what had been stolen from them. As dawn finally broke, she and Kelsey walked back toward the van. There was no victory music, no crowd, no sudden sense of closure. Just a quiet understanding that some wars don't end, they just change shape. And maybe the most powerful thing they could do now was live on their own terms, remember everything they weren't supposed to, and never stop asking questions. The truth wasn't a weapon. It was a compass. And it would always point toward the next mystery. The camera inside the van blinked red. It had been recording since the moment they stepped onto the airstrip. She reached for it, pausing only for a second before turning it toward her. She spoke directly to it, not as a victim, not as a pawn, but as someone who had come out the other side with her mind intact and her soul scarred but stronger. "If you're watching this," she said, "it means the story got out.
But don't look for me.
Look for yourself. Because if they did it to me, they could have done it to you. And if something feels off, if your memories don't line up, keep digging. The truth is deeper than you think." She hit upload. And somewhere out there, another person opened their eyes, saw the symbol, and started to remember.